Let's test this first. Where's the mic? Okay, hi. صباح الخير. قومتونا الصبح اليوم. Okay, welcome. It's lovely to have you both. Before we get into it, we have a very shocking and interesting topic we're discussing today, and we want to try to tackle it from different angles. I'm not going to stay too long, but it's a very good paradox to talk about. The pros, the cons of social media, its effect on our children, on us. I want to start with Kristin. You have a few things you wanted to start with,
Yes.
some slides.
Yes.
So please go ahead.
Okay. Do I have my first slide? Okay, there we go. So I would like to start by saying what an honor it is to be here today to share my son Carson's story as well as my journey from incredible grief to advocacy work. Next month will mark 4 years since the very worst day of my life. My son, Carson, with the beautiful blue-green eyes, an amazing smile, great sense of humor, had just finished his sophomore year in high school. We encouraged him to get his first summer job, and he worked hard to get one making pizzas. He came home from work that night happy and wrote his upcoming work schedule on our kitchen calendar. We celebrated him. We told him how proud we were of what he had accomplished. And in so many ways, our family was looking forward to an amazing summer. But that all ended the next morning. I woke up early to do some work on my computer. I looked down at my phone, and I saw that there was a text message from Carson regarding a suicide. I went running through the house, and I found that my son had hung himself in our garage while we slept. There are no words to describe the trauma that our family endured that morning, and it's something that never goes away. It's something that you live with for the rest of your lives. And so our first question was why? What had gone so terribly wrong overnight? We learned fairly quickly that Carson had been viciously cyberbullied by his high school Snapchat friends who were using anonymous apps to hide their identities. As parents, we were conservative with technology. We waited until Carson was through middle school to give him his first iPhone, a very old version with no apps on it. But by the time he got to high school, he was begging for Snapchat because that was the way all the kids were connecting. As parents, what we didn't know is that Snapchat had allowed anonymous apps onto the back end of their product. And anonymous apps, when marketed to teens, always lead to cyberbullying, usually a suicide. They get shut down, and then new ones come to market. So we looked into his phone even more, and we found that in the 2 weeks leading up to his suicide, he had received over 100 negative, harassing, sexually explicit, and humiliating messages from his high school Snapchat friends. He reached out to them, and he tried to handle this on his own, which many teens do. He reached out to his abusers and said, please swipe up and identify yourself. Clearly you have a problem with me. I'd like to talk things out in person. So here is my son trying to reclaim humanity in a digital world that was literally crushing him. No one ever did reveal their identity, and that's why in my testimony I say that the last search on his phone was for hacks to find out who was doing this to him. And when we look at what YOLO, the anonymous app on Snapchat, presented, it said that they had no tolerance for cyberbullying and that they would reveal the names of those who do so and ban them from the app. So after Carson's death, I reached out to YOLO. I needed to know who did this to my son, and I needed to know that they were banned from the app so they would not do it to any other kids. I was ignored all 4 times. And it was really at this point that I had a decision to make. Do I lay in bed and cry about this and just accept this, or do I begin to fight back? And I chose the latter, and I have not regretted it. Thank you. So I didn't know where to turn. This was 4 years ago, and many of these stories were not out there. And so I turned to the Center for Humane Technology after watching The Social Dilemma, and they were an amazing support for me. They provided me with resources and connections, and they allowed me opportunities to share Carson's story. And through that, I was able to connect with a law firm who informed me that YOLO would never respond to me, that I needed to file a lawsuit in order to make them respond. And so nearly a year after Carson's death, I filed a national class action lawsuit against Snapchat, YOLO, and LMK. Within 2 days, Snapchat had banned these 2 anonymous apps off of their platform. And then within 6 months, they made policy changes stating that they would not have anonymous features on Snapchat because they could not mitigate the risks at an acceptable level. I was happy that these apps could not harm other kids, but also saddened by the fact that it took my son dying and me filing a lawsuit to make them finally take the apps off of Snapchat. So the second part of my journey was finding my community. I knew that there were other parents out there who had experienced similar harms, and I needed to talk to them. So I co-founded the Online Harms Prevention Work Group through Fair Play for Kids, a Boston nonprofit. Our group has grown significantly over the last 3 years. We have digital wellness professionals, we have teachers, we have concerned parents, and our largest part of our group are parents who have lost their kids to online harms. So in addition to suicides because of cyberbullying, we have parents who have lost their kids to suicide because of sextortion, dangerous online challenges like the choking challenge, and fentanyl-laced drugs that can be marketed, purchased, and delivered over Snapchat. So what do we do to change the trajectory of these harms? I'm just going to take a brief. Many of us, parent survivors and other groups of younger people, are advocating for the Kids Online Safety Act, which is federal legislation. It was introduced over 2 years ago by Senator Blackburn and Blumenthal, and it now has 70 bipartisan co-sponsors in the Senate. The Kids Online Safety Act would do many things, but most importantly, it would require these companies to have a duty of care when they're creating these products for our children. In very specific areas, they need to prevent and mitigate cyberbullying. Carson's death was clearly preventable. These companies knew that anonymous apps when marketed to teens always leads to cyberbullying and usually a suicide. But also, we take objection to the feeding of harmful material to our children through the algorithms. These are not what kids are looking up, it's what is being fed to them. And it's in 4 specific areas: pro-suicide content, pro-eating disorder content, sexual exploitation, and pro-substance abuse content. We have families who kids have looked up inspirational quotes when a girlfriend broke up with them, and they get fed pro-suicide content. We have other families. Their child looked up simply a healthy recipe, and then in their For You feed is pro-anorexia content. This, I think we can all agree, is not what we want fed to our children. This was on the front pages of many newspapers around the country and maybe around the world. We have had 10 congressional CEO hearings of big tech. This was the 10th. It was at January 31st of this year, but what was different about it is that there were parents in the audience, including myself, with pictures of our children who had died on social media. This was the moment where Senator Hawley really forced Mark Zuckerberg to turn around and look at us and apologize. But that apology felt very, very empty because we know that Meta has spent so much money, $7.5 million in just the first quarter of this year, lobbying against the Kids Online Safety Act. They continue to choose profit over people, and those people are our children. And this is what we're up against when we advocate in DC, is the big tech lobbyists. This picture was from 2 weeks ago. We were able to meet with Senator Schumer, the Senate House Majority Leader, one of the most powerful positions in our government. We told him our stories, much like that picture with us sitting around that table with pictures of our children, reliving the very worst day of our lives and telling him why COSA is so important to us. We got a commitment from him that he would bring this legislation to the Senate floor by the end of June, and just this morning I received wonderful news that tomorrow in the US on the 23rd, the House is going to mark up COSA. It's already been introduced, and that was the next milestone that we were looking for. Never in our history has there been, well, in recent history, it's been 30 years, have we had an online safety legislation that has gone this far. But we once again have to roll up our sleeves, go back to the House side, tell our stories, and encourage them to co-sponsor COSA. But we do this because we are powered by the memories of our children and the fact that we don't want these tragedies to happen to any other family.
I think I speak on behalf of everyone to say how brave you are, Kristin. I know you're being very objective and very strong, and it's very admirable. And it had to take a catastrophe for you to choose to save so many people's lives, I think through things that we don't realize how dangerous it could be, because maybe as parents, we're now grown up, we have thicker skin, we don't realize that our children are going through this and they're not as thick-skinned as us. And we've never lived that. When we were young, we didn't have social media, and we didn't have hundreds of people messaging us or bullying us, and so we don't even know how to empathize with what they're going through at a very young age. So I think this is a message, of course, to the full globe and the Arab world and everywhere where social media is active, to realize that it's not only somebody just getting irritated. It could lead to death. It could lead to also somebody being alive but depressed or suicidal or unhappy. It has a lot of effects if it's not mitigated. Steve, I want to also go to you. We want to tackle this from very different angles. The first question I have is, both of your friends, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, famously raised their kids in households that we could say they're either tech-free or it was semi-tech-free or limited. And Silicon Valley techies often send their children to Waldorf schools where access to technology is rare and regulated. So it's a very interesting question where the people who are the geniuses in this technology are preventing their children at an early stage to go through technology, whether it's iPads or social media. So what do they fear? What are they not telling us?
Well, obviously, they're smart and knowledgeable, and those kind of people tend to avoid becoming a victim to the habituality, to the addiction of certain types of, especially social web apps. But, you know, you mentioned Steve Jobs, and I think when we started Apple, we were so much guided by the father of somebody who's very important in the Center for Humane Technology that Kristin mentioned. His name's Asa Raskin, and Jeff Raskin at Apple came in, and he brought the value of people. They always have to be worth more than the technology. And what you have to do when you're building a product, you have certain chips and wires and ports, and they can do certain calculations, certain speed. You have to put a lot of effort into creating software so they work in a natural human mode the way humans work. And obviously this was long ago. And Jeff ran our publications department. Publications are like manuals that people will read, human beings will read. If the engineers had an idea for an enhancement to a product, the publications department would have to be able to write it in a clearly understandable form, or it was not allowed in Apple. That's the sort of company we had. So much emphasis on the human is more important than the technology. And, you know, but we started an industry, and who knew where it would go. This was long before the internet. So this was back when you just bought a product, you owned it, you did whatever you wanted with it. It still worked the next year, still worked 40 years later, just like a broom you stored in your closet. You were responsible for the security of it. And those days are long past. The internet came, and eventually enough bandwidth came, and we had the social web started, and that's where we started going really wrong. And, you know, and right now, the social web is protected in the United States by legislation that lets them publish anything. They're not the publisher. They're just a third-party source. So people can come on and do the cyberbullying all the time. I can go on and make a little point, and people will jump all over me explaining why they have a different feeling about things. And it could be something very simple. But when it gets down to even illegal things can be done very easily on the social web, and nobody's ever punished. There's no accountability to the social web themselves. They were removed from all accountability, all responsibility. And that's some legislation that we've got to start changing and crack through and make them realize when there's crimes going on under their nose, just assign a human being to watch a few things, a real human. Answer your phone call. If somebody calls and tries to get a hold of somebody to get something corrected, you need a human that will understand why it's important. And I'm sorry, computers never do. We go through all these, voice channels. We have a problem on our computer or phone, and we call in. It's so hard to get to a human being. You get fed all this information that was already in manuals that doesn't even solve your problem anyway. And these voice trees, that's how computers treat us. It's algorithms. I call it AI, algorithmic inefficiency. And it's sad, and I sometimes feel very kind of sorry for my role in having created this digital world early in those days when things were good, and then they kind of turned bad. And today, back then, you bought something, you owned it. It was yours. Like you even owned your life back then. Nowadays, you buy something, and if you make a setting, they'll change on you. They'll change it because they feel like it very often. Or they'll have an upgrade. And usually the upgrades to me are downgrades. And things that used to know how to use them and where they were on the screen, they're different places, they're hidden, they're non-existent now, they work a different way. And it's very not treating the customer. I always came up thinking that the low-level person who's a customer, the end user, is more important than the manufacturer. And I still have that philosophy to this day. And I think we need to do a lot of things. COSA's one really good example. Why would it ever run into any fights over this sort of thing? Yeah, what happened to me was people were publishing my face and me talking about things, and then they said, send me 1 Bitcoin, and I, Steve Wozniak, will send you back 2 Bitcoin. And then people started somehow emailing me. I didn't know this was going on. And they started emailing me saying that they put their life savings into it. Where was their Bitcoin? And Facebook wouldn't even, or was it Meta on that one? No, that was YouTube on Google. They wouldn't do one thing. You couldn't get to a human at all. And if they took something down, 10 more popped up of the same thing. They wouldn't assign a human to just watch it every day. If somebody sees one of these claims of Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Steve Wozniak offering to send you back more Bitcoin, just cancel it. Get rid of those people. Identify them to the police by their name. The anonymity is one of the big problems we have on the social web. And there should be ways around that. Anyway, so I agree with everything Kristin said.
There was, I don't remember the exact words, but it was Mike Tyson saying it's so easy to talk and bully behind the screen until you actually get punched in the face. And he said it in a funny manner, but there's so much truth to it. Before social media and before anonymity, if we wanted to say something to somebody in school, you have to actually face them. So you would think 3 times before doing anything. Nowadays, you could be a coward. You could completely be invisible and just bully somebody with no consequences or accountability. And I think that's danger on many fronts. But to your answer, so can I easily say, Steve, that they kind of avoided technology because they realized that there is an addictive pattern to it for their children, and like you said, there is no control over the information that's being fed to children. It's just out there, and you can influence a child right or left. Is that in a nutshell?
Think about children in a classroom. If they're getting bullied, there's a human teacher there that can correct it and take steps on both sides of the bullying to help out. You just don't have that on the social web.
Correct.
It's very much the anonymity that it presents lets people behave in ways they wouldn't when they were around friends of theirs and socially responsible.
Kristin, I have an interesting long question, so I have to read it properly. At the higher level, you're an advocate for COSA Kids Online Safety Act, which is congrats on tomorrow's news. It makes social media companies more responsible for the safety and well-being of young users. But it's also faced, surprisingly, real opposition for a variety of reasons, including possible over-surveillance of young people and potential for heavy censorship that could negatively impact developing teenagers. Do you think there are any ways that COSA approach risks sacrificing real-world well-being in pursuit of digital well-being? I think that's the first question. Or is it always just the tension we must wrestle when it comes to these kind of measures? The first point of this long question is it's surprising that there is resistance, but not. It's surprising because you think if any ethical company or any, I think, Steve, you mentioned how it was a human-centric approach back in the day. Nowadays, maybe it's a profit-centric approach that I could compromise people's lives and their well-being for profit. So I understand that's where the resistance could come. But it's also from a human-centric point of view, like, are you serious? Are you actually opposing something so basic and should be there? So.
Well, I'm just really glad that you asked that question. I did touch on it in the beginning. COSA is not a surveillance bill or a censorship bill, and that is what the messaging from the big tech lobbyists have been, and it is just absolutely not true. Kids under COSA can look up any thing they want. What we're objecting to is the dangerous content and those 4 things that I talked about being fed to children through algorithms. And it will do some other things that Steve just mentioned in his own situation. It will require that these companies respond to parents who are bringing up concerns and issues. We all face this. It is like a brick wall when you are trying to reach out. You have a kid in crisis, and there's something terrible going around, and even though it violates the company's community guidelines, they either don't get a response back from the company, or it is a generic canned response saying it meets community guidelines when it doesn't. And so opening up that door would be really important. They have to respond within a certain number of days to complaints. But yeah, the issue of, and we have gone over this time and time again, we even strengthened the bill in the second reiteration where it was self-harm. Now those harms are defined as those 4 that I talked about: pro-suicide, pro-eating disorder, substance abuse, and sexual exploitation, and they're all linked to a medical diagnosis. So in no way, I mean, as a parent, I hate to think of kids still looking these things up, but under COSA, there's nothing we can do about that. That is free speech, freedom of information. But in no way is there censorship going on under COSA.
Can I ask you a question that's not here? Is it tiring, Kristin, to be fighting something that seems to be so basic?
I know. It is. I mean, we are asking for just the basic safeguards. Like every other industry, they have to think about their product before they release it. Yeah, it is tiring. Sometimes I'm almost like, I can't even believe we have to have these conversations. I passed legislation in Oregon State, and that was probably a mistake to do that first, because I had no idea that passing federal legislation would require so much work.
Well, I think you have a full house here supporting you and people around the world, because we feel it. We have our children, and what you're asking for there's no second thought to it. It's just a fight that people like you have to do it for the rest of us. So it's a bit unfair, but it's very, I'm grateful to know that there is somebody like you doing that.
Well, and I would just say we have representatives from around the world here. Stand up if you see something's wrong on social media. Speak out. We need to have these companies feel the pressure from around the world.
Yes. Steve, you've been very vocal about social media's impact on society, and from the proliferation of mental health problems that you've discussed to the increasing spread of misinformation. So we can talk about the mental health problems, and we can talk about the misinformation, which you touched on. And you've said that platforms weren't designed with the long-term human well-being in mind, which is interesting when we talk about long-term. Maybe it started that way, but on the long term, it doesn't really look after that. So would you describe these products as more defective, or would you describe them as addictive?
Well, almost all technology starts out trying to be good. I mean, look at Facebook. People being in communication with all their friends all over the world, what a great idea. But then Facebook changed, and they changed to make money. And to make money, it was really, Facebook almost makes none of their money over you having friends and groups and all that, just some low-cost servers. What they make their money on is understanding you, learning everything about you. When you click like, it's not really going to the person that you'd like their post. It's going to 100 advertisers. You can even get a printout of their names. And everything you do in your life, the things you like, you look at, you're interested in, little words you say get remembered forever to be able to use, yourself is worth money. You are the product, they say. And that is really weird. If it's me, myself, don't I deserve some of the money that my life is worth? My feelings, my beliefs, my values, don't I deserve some of it? No, you just get a little free email address or something. It's so low cost as long as they don't have to hire humans. And that's where we're short. We just try to figure out a solution. You're going to start a company in Silicon Valley, we got to figure out a way to sell subscriptions so they don't really know the total cost. It's just per month, some reasonable amount. And we got to, everybody has to go through us in a cloud. They have to go through us, and we own you. We own everything you do. We'll make upgrades. We'll make changes that, whether you like them or not, we won't ask you. And we're gonna make all this money off of you doing nothing. We don't want to hire humans, because human who could listen to your problem and say, "Oh, that is real. We've got to take some corrective action." Oh no, don't want any accountability. Don't want any of that responsibility either. And so to even talk that way, they just say, you say, there's a crime going on. And what's the answer from these companies? It's free speech. And it might be a real crime, taking money from people. So we need to reevaluate this. I'm sort of sorry for my role in it. I often like to say that those of us who brought this digital world should be executed, or worse yet, we should be made to live in it ourselves. And I get so frustrated when I'm doing something logical, maybe on an app on a phone, and it just doesn't work. I want things to work in life. And those days are pretty much past. It used to be that, for example, we could put speech recognition into a phone with no cloud, no Siri, no internet, just speech recognition, and you could tell it to do things and run apps and call people, call your wife, built into the phone. Nowadays, if you can't get to the internet because you're in a car traveling or something, if you can't get to the internet, you can't even get to Siri to make the call for you. Why don't you build the backup right into the phone? There are an awful lot of things that computers can do themselves without access to the internet. Access to the internet gives you more, but we've just sort of forgotten. We don't want to ever allow things to exist like as an app that you own and you bought and you paid for, and you control it and do the settings.
Steve, you mentioned a few times today that it bothers you sometimes that maybe you played a role in this. However, I want to be the other side of it. There are pros and cons to everything in life. Maybe I will not be sitting with both of you here if there was no internet, if there was no iPhones, if there was no technology, even with a lot of people here. So it was something that was created, and it's a tool. I've always talked about social media and technology as a tool. We are the culprits as human beings. We know how to use this knife to cut a loaf of bread or to stab somebody. That's what it is in the end. So if I have to go to the other side and I say, Steve, with what you have created, whether through technology or Apple, what are the ways we can use it for well-being, for the good? Because we can. It's literally a tool. But if greed is overcoming us, of course we're using it and abusing it. But if we actually say this tool can bring societies together, can educate parents to bring up children better, that can bring 3 people from very different parts of the world together and just talk about normal things that we all care about. So you see, there are many dimensions to this. So if I go to the other side and I ask you, what can we do now using all of the technology that's available to maybe enhance the world? You can use it for so many good things.
We put too much of our trust into technology to come up with the answers. AI is an example. Look at AI and ask a question, you get a ton of detailed, here's what you can do and this and that, and propose to your boss. But then again, I think it's a good search engine in a sense, in one way, but there should be a human being who sits and looks at what comes from AI, since it's known to hallucinate or have deep fakes, and a human should say, what is this? Can I understand it? Now can I repeat it in my own words because I learned from it? However, some just pass it on. And passing on a lot of these AI reports, it's still boring. It's not like from a human that has emotions. As a professor in Nashville that allows AI reports in his class, he's never had one good enough to give more than a C+ grade. They're just too boring unless it goes through a human that understands how to concisely pick out the right parts of it, and they convey a meaning in my head, and they'll convey a meaning in my boss's head. But it involves a lot of understanding, and we tend to think AI is really thinking, not a prayer. AI, I believe in the A, and it's artificial. Yeah, and you know, intelligence, is it really thinking? Is it doing anything like the human brain? We've always known that when computers could play tic-tac-toe or checkers or chess, that they were just following sets of rules, simple sets of rules, and they could play themselves and develop their own set of rules because they can play a trillion games in a day, and no human being could ever do that and remember it all. So, you know, is that those, and that leads to a bunch of algorithms, but it's not thinking. When I went back to college after 10 years, Apple was successful. I went under a fake name to get my last year of college. I went as a psychology major to study these things and what is intelligence and what are brains and how do they compare to computers. And all I found out is we do not know how the brain is wired, how it's hooked up. We have little bits of outer information about it. We don't even know that our memories are in the brain, or we could find them. We could find them and say, here are some synapse connections that add up to a word like corn. No, we can't. Well, I was with a company once that figured out how to make a brain. Takes 9 months. Thanks.
Sometimes,
That's like, you know,
sometimes less. I came in 8 months.
Yeah.
When we started Apple, we wanted to make blind people and sighted people more equal. And look how much we've succeeded. Everywhere you go, look on the sidewalk, and people are walking around.
Kristin, I want to go from big decisions, big moves, which you're doing, but I also believe it all trickles down to the individual. So we talked about how you can play a huge role, which you are, in governance and legislation and rules and regulations, because we can all agree some things have to be rules. You can't just expect people to do the right thing.
Right.
So we agree on that. But it also comes, like you said, that each of us plays a role in your house, in your family, between your friends. So how would you, let's bring it down to the individual. What do you have to say out of all the knowledge you have today to the individual, to the parent, to the brother, to the sister?
Well, unfortunately for us, we were the first generation of parents raising kids on iPhones, and they were really the lab rats for this terrible experiment. The parents that I meet now that have younger kids and tweens, they are learning from our mistakes and our tragedies, and they want to do things differently. In the United States, there's a movement called Wait Until 8th, and we have a new book out by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation, and these movements are pushing waiting to give your child a smartphone until high school, when they're through middle school. And this way, they really develop the foundation of what a real friend is and what real interaction is before you set them up for looking for likes and followers. That's artificial friendship. And so I've been really impressed with the younger parents, and we hope that this movement can pick up and be spread around the world. I think by building that movement grassroots up with how individuals are dealing with this at a family level and legislation, we can finally make a dent in the social media harms.
Yeah, I like how you sandwiched it.
Right.
I think that's the right approach because the pressure comes not only from Kristin but from everybody as a
Right.
society. Um, Stephen, you mentioned there's a quote that I have of you from 1996. It said, "Our first computers were born not out of greed or ego, but in the revolutionary spirit of helping common people rise above the most powerful institutions." So yeah, I bring something from the past. So big tech rarely has real people and real lives, like you also mentioned earlier, in mind anymore. And there's certainly a lot to feel quite hopeless about. But, and this is something the summit will look at even more tomorrow, where do you see the silver linings? Where do the common people still win? Where can we find harmony and health in technology?
Is it difficult to find that anymore? I mean, we went through a long time in Silicon Valley of increasing the economic background of the country, and through Moore's law and chips. We used to make one transistor when I was very young, and for the same cost now we make 60 billion transistors on one chip in your iPhone. And so we've gone through this. A lot of young people want to be entrepreneurs. I believe strongly in entrepreneurs, that entrepreneurs starting new businesses sometimes find new ways of doing things in life that didn't exist before, and it's not a zero-sum game. It's the principal method of increasing economies, and that's good. The trouble is, we find out that, well, there's more money in avoiding humans and getting away from responsibility. A lot of companies start up. How will we market this? What will our business model be? The business models have changed a lot, and it's hard to see the silver lining in that side of things. As far as for people, we have examples like Kristin's that teach us lessons, but really, up until 8 years old, we should have in primary education, we should have courses where students are shown, here are some examples of bullying or what's wrong in other ways, and you don't want to ever go in that way. It starts with the most important positive aspect of being a good person is being honest. Honesty, that's where it starts with. Long ago, that's one influence that I got from my parents, thankfully, because you don't ever think, how do I say something that I think a different way, but I'm going to tell somebody else this is good for you, but I know what the problems with it are, and I'm not speaking them. Why are these companies so silent about what they do, what they don't do, what their algorithms are, how they manipulate you? They don't want to come out and talk about it because they know it's bad. If you're honest, you're only saying truths that you really, truly believe inside.
There was, I do interviews, and I was talking recently about, it was a very basic question, but my director kind of shed light. And I was like, why are children harsh? Kids don't care if they see somebody like, he's ugly. They don't even filter it. And I'm like, why do kids do that in school? Why do they bully? And my director said it so simply. He said, they lack empathy because they lack experience. So we can't blame the child sometimes that he's attacking or saying something harsh. We have to blame people for not bringing the right ethics, for giving them tools, like you said, Kristin, that is allowing them to do this kind of behavior. So there was another point where people nowadays, they'll put an iPhone in front of them, click record, and they'll say, I'm not doing well, blah, blah, blah. This person hurt me. I'm feeling really sad. I'm depressed. Click, post, being vulnerable. And that's not really vulnerability. That's you and a piece of equipment. Let's do that conversation with the person that hurt you.
Right.
Face to face.
Right.
That's life. And that's what you said, up to 8 or up to 9. Maybe that's what we need children to learn, social skills, how to make friends, how to not make friends, how to be jealous of or get in a fight. Or you learn how to deal with human beings. You learn how to look at people in their eyes and have a conversation. And I think that's the scary part. Go ahead.
Well, even experienced adults, though, get scammed these days by all the internet scams, the spam, the ones trying to fish you and get your email addresses and all. And a lot of people have been hurt by that, and even with experience. Now, for children, if you're experienced in life and you can think things out, maybe you're an experienced driver on the roads, and you say, "Oh my gosh, these young people are so horrible." Well, all of us were inexperienced before we became experienced. It's a step you have to go through.
Steve, the chairman mentioned also that recently you had a talk about happiness or the purpose of life. Can you, before, I know we have to finish, but can you touch on that?
Yeah, before Apple, and I was in college and made my first year of college, and I read an article about a man named Sumner Redstone, who was CEO of Viacom, a big media company. And in today's dollars, he was going off and buying a company for $1 billion and going to another city to sell one for $1 billion. And as I read the article, that's in today's dollars, I thought, oh my gosh, would I want to be that man with so much power, so much wealth? And then I remembered a funny story, a prank that myself and some friends had played, or a joke that we told them. We laughed. And I said, on the day I die, I'd rather be laughing. And I decided that life was not about accomplishment as much for me. It was about happiness, enjoying things, smiling, things that make you laugh, a lot of comedy, making your own jokes, making your own pranks, going to comedy, going to music, whatever makes you happy, and smile. So I said, life is about happiness. H equals S minus F. Happiness equals smiles minus frowns. Minus frowns is the key part. A lot of people say, oh, I'll just tell myself don't frown. No, there are actually techniques. One of the big techniques is don't argue. If you argue, you have a line of reasoning, somebody else has a line of reasoning, and they come to a different conclusion. The important thing to realize is, well, everybody has a good head that they want to follow some reasoning to get to their answers. So everybody's good. There ain't no good guy, there ain't no bad guy. There's only you and me, and we just disagree, is what Dave Mason sang. And there are Bob Dylan quotes along those lines. So don't argue to avoid frowns. Also, if something goes bad, it's making you frown, your car gets dented, take a constructive step. You take the car to a body shop to get it fixed. Just always forget a lot about the past. Don't go back and question the past. Oh my gosh, if I'd only done something different. Well, why? Then all you're going to do is wind up with a reason to frown, to feel that you didn't do as good as you could have. So my formula, happiness equals smiles minus frowns, is one I've lived with to this day. I didn't need anything like Apple to have, life made for me forever.
Kristin, I'd like to end this session with you. If you have any words for all of us, I know it's a compact panel, but it's a very important one. So if you have anything that you'd like to add that you can leave us with.
Well, I think even though my story is tragic, when I look back at the comments and the exchanges that happened between Carson and his abusers, he listened to the things we as parents talked about at the dinner table about not typing anything online that you would not want on a billboard with your name and face next to. We talked to our kids about the fact that behind the screen is a person. And one of the things that has really come out of Carson's story is that in the end, kindness really does matter.
Thank you so much.